now. So we are live. Audio is coming up. And here we go. We are live, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to a live stream of the Longkang Kitties. My name is John Wang, joined by Angie, and I am the most handsome non-religious man on the face of the planet.
I
This is facts.
I am
alright?
like
This is facts.
I'm superstitious but not religious. Give me 4 numbers and let me win 4D.
So, and today we have a very, very special guest with us, okay? So, our special guest, his name is Mohamed Imran Mohamed Taib, okay? And he is a director of the Dialogue Center, he's the director of Dialogue Center focusing on conversations and diversity and inclusion, and a founding board member of Center for Interfaith, CIFU, an inclusive interfaith organization. He was previously working in government service for 19 years and was a former associate research fellow at the Rajaratnam School of International Studies. He writes frequently on issues of religion and multiculturalism and has published in local and international news agencies such as the Straits Times, Channel News Asia, Today Online, and SCMP. He has been a frequent speaker and facilitator on faith and diversity issues and has delivered guest lectures in university, government agencies, schools, community organization, and MNC. Okay, and we welcome him very much into the Longkang.
Thank you for coming.
Imran.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm not sure what to expect in the Longkang.
We'll try not to burn you too badly. It's a very cozy environment here.
Sure. I remember Longkang only when you catch tadpole when you were younger.
Yeah. That's what my dad was telling me. Like he used to do that a lot. But maybe let's talk a little bit more about you.
Sure.
I have been following you for quite some time. Now I know that made me sound a bit like a stalker, but I really love the stuff that you write on your Facebook because you do put out a lot of your thoughts on current events and on like race relations in Singapore and regionally. How did you get into this line of work?
I think it's kind of accidental in a sense. I mean, typically Singaporean grew up, in a neighborhood school, mixing around people of all races. Yeah. But, interestingly, my first awakening towards race matters was really when I was already working.
Okay, how old were you?
I was in my early 20s.
Okay.
I was actually an educator. Yeah, so that's when I got sensitive to the kind of language being used that surrounds issues of race, especially qualifying statements like for a Malay, he's smart, right?
Right.
So
right.
I mean that's quite a loaded term that contains a lot of things to unpack, and it carries certain stereotypes or even prejudice, you can say. So I've heard many of these kind of statements being said, and that awakened me to the fact that, look, there are stereotypes around, and when these are directed at my students, for example, I can see the debilitating effects, and that put me on a journey to actually look into the whole issue of racism and how we have grown up imbibing many of these stereotypes unquestioningly, but there are implications, especially to the development of the child or our own development as we grow up imbibing a lot of these stereotypes and how it might restrict us in our aspirations even.
I think there was a lot of talk about the internalizations of all these negative stereotypes, right?
Yes.
Like within the past couple of years with BLM and all that stuff happening in the world and also locally, I think Singaporeans are kind of waking up to the idea of racism, especially for us as the majority, right? Like we've been so blinded to what's happening around us, or we don't even take notice that like sometimes what we say can be racist. Like for example, like what you said, oh, he's really smart for a Malay person, right? Like you think, oh, I'm giving him a compliment, but actually you're not, right? So to that end, how did you decide to go into interfaith and like dialogues and stuff like that? How did you think that it was the way to go forward?
Well, if you had met me, let's say 20 years ago, we probably met a different kind of Imran.
Okay, how were you like?
I mean, I grew up with a typical mindset that, I mean, I grew up from a culturally religious family, in the sense that it's a family that practices Islam in a communal way, growing up with traditional values, and Islam is more of a communal identity marker. But growing up, you want to establish your own identity, right? So you were searching for something more secure, and that was a period also where there was a growth of religious revivalism in this part of the world as well as globally, where youths are actually turning to religion as a strong identity marker for them. Now, I didn't realize what was happening at that time until, of course, later on I reflect. I think it's got a lot to do with both local development process as well as global politics. For example, because being Malay is seen as something that is kampung, backward, we want to move away from this kind of stereotypes of being Malay. So you look for some other identity.
So meaning, do you mean that you have to kind of reject a little bit of your Malay identity to
Yes,
integrate
initially,
into...
yeah.
Okay.
And I'll be frank also, like there are parents, for example, would tell their own children, don't mix too much with your own race,
Right, yeah.
because you might learn all the negative stuff from them, yeah. Mix more with the Chinese, then you'll be hardworking like them,
Right, right.
So this can cause a lot of questioning in a person who's growing up, looking for identity. And of course, at that time, Islamic revivalism was on the rise, especially in its interaction with the West. And there is something, I would say, something exciting about being able to identify with the wider Muslim community in the world, resisting against many of these perceived threats against Islam, especially if you look at the political context. You look, for example, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in the 1980s, all the way to the conflict between the West and Iran, for example, after the 1979 revolution. And then you see the Bosnian War in Europe, where Muslims are being massacred. The Palestinian issue is another factor, and the first Gulf War, where American forces were established in Saudi Arabia, and then
So
there
is
was an
that
uproar.
is that when you think that that's when the kind of global unity of Muslims happened? Because
Yes, there's a fermentation of this
Okay.
idea of the global ummah, where Muslim youths especially are driven by this whole idea we need to defend Islam because Islam is under attack. Islam is under threat. But of course, that's a global consciousness, but it's also localized, right?
Yeah.
Here you find the emergence of groups that are actually proclaiming the need to establish Islam as a strong identity marker in a very exclusive way. So there's a heightened religiosity in the 1980s onwards.
So was it like a little bit more relaxed prior to this period? Meaning like people were not so...
I wouldn't call it relaxed because then the association is
Oh,
that,
okay, like so more
relaxed
like...
means you are less committed to Islam. It's not that.
Sorry, I'm not a secular person. Like, yep.
I think a different way of looking at it would be Islam and culture is quite infused,
Right.
and it's been moving along together in this part of the world. That has informed the values and the community life and all that. So that is slowly giving way to a more global consciousness of being Muslim that is related to the idea that Muslims must fight against all these threats that are coming in, secure your identity and be part of the global ummah. And at the same time also plant the flag of Islam and proclaim the supremacy of the religion against all other people. Yeah.
That's actually a really good tie-in to like why we're here today, actually, because like back in earlier this August of 2022, like this novelist Salman Rushdie was stabbed multiple times during a public lecture. So the attacker was arrested. He was charged for assault and attempted murder, and the author was severely wounded and hospitalized. So he's not dead yet. But for those of you who are like Gen Z or like millennials, right? So who is Salman Rushdie? He is an Indian-born British-American novelist. So he first got into like big load of trouble when he published his fourth novel, the Satanic Verses in 1988. So that was 34 years ago. It is inspired by the life of the Islamic prophet Muhammad. And when it was out, it was banned in several countries, including Singapore in 1989. And, there were lots of like outbreaks of protests and riots over this book. Like the book was burned in several protests in the UK as well. People died in the protests. Like the Japanese translator was stabbed to death in 1991. The Italian translator was seriously injured, also by multiple stabbings. The Turkish translator, he was targeted by arsonists. They set fire to a hotel and killed 37 people. The translator was fine though, so he came out all right. But basically, there was a huge outcry over like this book, The Satanic Verses. So could you, for those of us who are non-Muslims, give a background context on why this book was so offensive? Like, what is the Satanic Verses and why are you so offended?
Yeah, so that was quite a pivotal moment. The book was published in 1988. Yeah, the fatwa was 1989, if I can recall correctly.
Yeah, it was something like 6 months later before
Yeah,
the
1989.
Yeah. I don't think the book was inspired by the life of the Prophet. I think Salman Rushdie was an author, and he writes many books. So I think this one was his fourth novel.
Yeah.
So it follows the genre of magical realism.
Yes.
And there's a mixed bag of things there. But of course, there was an account that actually took from the apocryphal tradition within Islam that talks about how the Prophet had been whispered by the devil himself to actually worship the three false gods. Yeah. So that incident can be found in the Muslim tradition. Yeah. Albeit that many Muslims are not aware of that. And also it's contentious in the sense that some says that the record of that was actually questionable, but that's beside the point. So he was actually utilizing that story to weave into his whole magical realism of the characters that were there. So the offensive thing, and I put it in inverted comma because we can assume that all Muslims are offended by that. In fact, when I read the book myself, I couldn't make head or tail of it. It's really difficult text to actually follow.
His literary style is so flowery.
Yes.
And like there's so many words in highfalutin language. But just let me make a point that he never really like talked about Islam. He just has names that are very similar to names in the Quran.
Yes.
Right? And then also like events that happened that are kind of similar or based on.
Yeah, I guess the offensive thing is really when he had a play of word, like for example, the character is Mahound, which was a derogatory term for the Prophet. It's a play of word with Muhammad, which means the praiseworthy one. But Mahound is kind of a word that was used in the medieval period to actually it was derogatory of the Prophet, associating him with something evil. Then there's also this whole characters of the wives of Mahound at the brothel and assume the names of like Aisha, who's a respected wives of the Prophet, things like that. So this utilization of these imageries, these symbolisms, is what became offensive to Muslims, right? So I think the Muslim reactions also needs to be put in context, right? It was 1980s.
You were talking about the revivalism, right? Is that why there was such a strong backlash?
Of course. So there was heightened consciousness, but also it's quite unique to the UK situation also. You mentioned about the book burning which happened in Birmingham and etc., right?
Do you remember it? Because you were like living through it.
I was very young at that
time.
You
were very young.
I mean, not
10 years old?
young.
You're like maybe like less than 10 maybe?
Oh, you ask me. You can get my age from there. I'm not answering that. But no, I was in secondary school maybe.
Okay.
So where was I? Sorry. The context of it needs to be understood. The political context. So UK, of course, it's a huge migrant population coming from various parts of the world, and there's a lot of South Asians, there's a lot of North Africans, and all. They were living in quite enclaves in the suburbs. Yeah. So UK's multiculturalism that developed then was to look at these pockets of communities and categorize them as racial or religious communities. Initially, it was more of racial categories that shapes the pockets of communities that live in the enclaves, but more and more of them assumed the religious identity from the period of 1980s. And then the UK government had then to deal with these groups of people through that lens of their representations. So, for example, this is the rise of the Muslim Council of Britain, for example, that come to represent the Muslim community and as spokesperson for the community. So that played a factor in terms of accentuating a sense of religious identity, which gets channeled through representative bodies, which then becomes lobby groups or pressure groups to the government. It's a similar process in America that we see. It's a similar process even in Singapore, because interestingly, when the Maintenance of Religious Harmony Act came in 1990, it was mentioning about the increase in religious lobbying that the government was worried about and wanted to kind of separate state and religion and strengthen the secular basis of the state. So anyway, so all that plus the global political tensions that the American foreign policy, for example, in the Middle East. So this and its rivalry with the Iranian attempt to actually influence the Muslim world, which was rivaled by Saudi Arabia. So there's a mixed bag of things going on. And that actually created the context for why Ruhollah Khomeini's fatwa became a flashpoint. He was also asserting his influence, or rather the Iranian influence in the Muslim world, and that fatwa played to that context, yeah, because it was probably the first time in the modern period where a fatwa assumed a global status. Normally, fatwas are localized, right? But this one is a global fatwa, death fatwa, that actually becomes transnational, right? That he assumed the authority that this fatwa applies to everyone around the world to actually condemn Salman Rushdie.
What is the reaction for that fatwa? Because it's one person proclaiming it, right? And then like, what if there are people who like don't agree with it?
Yeah, I mean,
could
the
they do
nature
anything?
of fatwa is it's non-binding,
right?
And it's questionable whether such a transnational fatwa can be issued, especially in living in this nation-state system. It will only be binding on those people who are asking for that fatwa,
okay,
or within the authority of the person who issues the fatwa, right? So in Singapore, for example, we have the Mufti, which is seen as the representative of the Muslims here. And when he and the fatwa committee issued a fatwa, then it's binding only on Muslims. You can't say that you can use this fatwa in other parts of the world. You can't.
Right.
But that's why this fatwa by Khomeini is very, very controversial, because it's transnational, it's global in nature, and it's a death fatwa.
Right. Is it a common thing? Like, because I was kind of like trying to research like what a fatwa was, and then because I've only heard it in the news in relation to like this death threat or like death fatwa, but actually it's just a ruling on a point of Islamic law given by a recognized authority. So it could be on any kind of topic, right?
Yeah, I think the more fundamental thing is is there such a thing as a death sentence for blasphemy?
Yeah.
So that's the question, right? Can someone who has been blasphemous or even has apostatized be given a death sentence? Yeah.
Right. So I guess like the really interesting thing for me was that in the wake of this, you did a post on your Facebook, and that was also when I like contacted John. And I was like, please get him on so that we can talk about this issue. And maybe I'll just read what you wrote, or maybe summarize it. Like, feel free to contradict me if I do it wrongly. Basically, you're talking about your concern over the comment section of Malay newspapers like Berita Harian and Berita Media Corp when they reported on the stabbing. And what you said was that most people who are Muslims do not condone the attack. right? But in the comment section, you always see the people who agree with it and they comment on it, right? And then the people who don't agree don't tend to like write on Facebook and be like, hey, you're wrong, man. You know, like we don't condone this. And you're talking about like, you know, how do we marginalize these voices? And, you know, how can the
Yeah.
Malay society do
Is it also a
stuff?
bit like the Guantanamo defense where it's like, oh, the US will say, for example, yeah, we don't, our laws forbid us from torturing prisoners on US soil, but we can do it in Guantanamo Bay. You know, that kind of
What?
basically what we won't do it. It's a bit like, yeah, we're not gonna follow the fatwa, we're not gonna like kill this fella. But if somebody else does it, right, then it's like, well, you know, if it's done, it's done. You know, that kind of.
Yeah, I think we should not underestimate the power of fatwa, even though, you know, it's just a fatwa. I don't think a fatwa is just a fatwa. It's a signaling also. There's
Yeah.
symbolic value of a fatwa, even though it's not targeted towards any groups of people other than the target of the fatwa, right? There's been studies done of how fatwas on groups and declaring them as under the charge of blasphemy or even declaring certain groups as infidels do have an impact, especially when you can see actually the rise of violence against groups that has been declared as heretical.
What would
some
that
parts of the world.
entail?
So, for example, studies have been done in Indonesia, for example. The fatwa by a religious group against deviant sect. And you can see a correlation with the rise in violence against that religious sect that has been deemed as deviant. These are vigilante groups that took into their own hands and began attacking them and all that. Of course, you can say there's no relationship between the fatwa and the violence being done by some groups, you know, vigilante groups, for example. But that should also make people who come out with the fatwa to be more mindful of how the effect of the fatwa might have on groups that are already looking for excuses to attack certain groups on the basis of their deviancy, right?
So, like, I guess the question is, let's say I'm a Muslim, right, and I disagree with the attack, right? I might really hate the book and I think that it's wrong, but I don't agree, I don't condone the violence, right? Like, if I wrote like a comment against somebody who was like, oh, good, you know, like, I'm so glad that he got stabbed. If I said that, hey, you know, Islam does not preach violence, would that be considered like going against the fatwa? Like, is that considered heretical in that sense?
No, I don't think so. Well, it really depends what we're talking about. What's the fatwa all about, right? And before I forget, also I must mention that the death fatwa against Salman Rushdie also comes with a bounty.
Yeah, it's a huge bounty. It's like 3 million,
more
is
than
it?
3 million, yeah.
Yeah. I was like, God damn, this guy almost got it.
Oh dear. No, we shouldn't wish for that.
Okay, just kidding.
Maybe you got half. What's that?
Oh, is it?
I don't know.
Like, how close to death was it? 75%, you get 75% of it?
I have no idea. But anyway, that's unfortunate. There's even a bounty on his head. Yeah, for many years, he was under the protection of the UK government.
Yeah, he went into hiding for like, I think 10 years or so after the fatwa was issued. And then I think I heard an interview where he said that he didn't even know like the thing was going to last for 10 years. So basically when the police came, he only took like a small bag thinking it was going to be like a few days or a few weeks or something like that.
Yeah.
And then it stretched out into years.
He wrote a very interesting memoir. I think Joseph Anton or something like that. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. But back to the whole question of what was it again? Remind me again.
It's like going against the fatwa.
Oh yeah. I mean, if you were to say, and I think this is the position of many Muslims, my sense is that, of course, they were upset with the kind of provocations that's totally unnecessary, and they would agree that a red line has been crossed in terms of denigrating religion that they hold very dear as part of their identity, and that is understandable. and that's to be expected. I mean, I myself as a Muslim, I feel very uncomfortable with some of these things that were being done to has a sense of provocation. But of course, whether satanic verses was done with that intent or not, we do not know.
According to him, it's not lah.
Yes, and I
So
will
he
take his
says,
words for
yeah,
it. Yeah,
yeah.
but there are
The way that an artist intends his work versus the way it's received can be very different, right?
That's the depth of the author, right?
Yeah.
People can read and interpret it in many ways,
Yeah.
and sometimes the interpretation comes with certain interests by certain groups to make people see that it was this intent, even though the author might mean differently, right?
And also sometimes, like once the dominating what do you call it, narrative has been set, people read it with that intention.
And I'll be frank with you, how many of those who were so upset with Salman Rushdie's
actually
work
read it?
has actually read it?
The attacker, he actually only read two pages or so of the work. Surprisingly, I think maybe this is a byproduct of aging, right? Like when I read that article that said that this attacker, who is only 24 years old, mind you, only read 2 pages, I felt this wave of sadness and compassion for him, because like I feel like if you read the entire book and you're like, God, I really hate this guy, I want to stab him, I can kind of like agree with it a little bit more, even though like that's a really weird statement to make. But just like the fact that he's only read 2 pages and probably not even properly,
it's sad,
just makes me sad.
It's sad, and I think that chap needs help.
For sure.
That's my first sentiment. But again, people who have been so upset about things, I think it's important to understand where that is coming from. That people are easily upset over these things. Where that is coming from. I think it comes also from this sense that of the insecurity that many Muslims felt in current situation. And they've been fed with the narrative that that the world out there is out to harm them, that Islam is under siege, and Muslims are being attacked everywhere, and therefore the instinctive response is to actually defend themselves, defend Islam, defend the religion, and to actually paint this whole narrative of a cosmic battle between good and evil, right? So it's a very binary way of looking at situation, and this has been driving the whole geopolitics even on both sides. This idea of the clash of civilizations that at one time has been very strong and informs the narrative of many foreign policies even, right? So there are real problems, yes. There is a growing Islamophobia in Western countries, and that has got to do with many factors, socioeconomic factors, the fact of immigrants who are not able to settle in and,
integrate and stuff.
Yeah, ghettoization, the rise of racism in that part of the world, which commensurates with the whole rise of the far right, with hate speech that is unbridled. People can say anything now to offend people. All these factors led to the sense of insecurity that minorities feel in many of these countries. So when someone were to do that kind of provocation, it's seen as part of this wider landscape of being attacked, simply for their religious identity, for being Muslim, for being immigrant who's not accepted within the so-called liberal West that is supposed to be welcoming, cosmopolitan, open, but that's not what they are observing, right?
During I think earlier last year, the great thing about social media is everybody posts their thoughts, right? That's a great thing. You can read it. And also, I think that's the most terrible thing about social media. Everybody posts their thoughts. But one really interesting thing was during the Israel-Palestine outbreak of violence that happened last year, I think in May, I read this IG story about of a Malay Muslim friend where she wrote about her feelings towards it. And she was talking about and I'm just paraphrasing it very badly. She was talking about how if they voice their support for Palestine, they get thought of as they are afraid to be thought of as terrorists or extremists just because they stand up, they voice their support, for the people who are suffering in Palestine.
Or
and that just
anti-Semitic.
or anti-Semitic, and that like kind of opened my eyes to that sort of stress that the Muslim community must face every time like something like this happens. Right? They're like, oh shit, not another one. Like you're gonna put the spotlight on us.
Yeah. So the tendency is then to say that this has got nothing to do with Islam.
Yeah.
Totally nothing to do with the Muslim community. It's just some random act of violence by people who claim to be Muslims, but they're not really Muslims in that sense. So that's just one reaction. The other reaction is also coming from the non-Muslim side. Oh, this has got everything to do with Islam. Islam fundamentally preaches violence, and that's driving people and pushing them towards these acts of violence because of the teachings itself, because of what Islam represents. So these are two extreme responses. I think the truth is somewhere in between.
Right.
That you cannot say that a particular region advocates for violence, because that's not really what we see in history. It's not really...
I mean, violence is across religions and
across-
non-religions,
yes,
right?
Yeah, of course.
It's just the way that men practice it.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a dual face to religion. It can be a force for good, and it can be a force for evil, for violence. It's how people utilize religion that matters. So similarly, Islam can be interpreted in a peaceful way, and that has been the most dominant one so far throughout history. And what we are seeing right now, out of almost 2 billion Muslims, if the propensity for violence is very strong within the religious teaching, then we are in trouble. 2
Right.
billion Muslims will be, everyone is a
Exactly.
potential
You would have
terrorist.
you would have a lot less people actually, because
Exactly, but-
everyone's killing each
But
other.
the number of terrorists who are Muslims, who claim to be doing it in the name of Islam, is less than 1%. It's a minuscule number. But of course, that does not mean that there's no problem at all. That there are people who are being driven by certain ideological stance and utilizing religion in their pursuit to establish some political gains or to correct what they perceive to be injustices and doing violence in that process. We need to also take that into account and address it. So Muslims cannot totally not do anything.
Right. And I think like maybe
Just to listen,
Go ahead.
just to roll back on one of the points that you raised up earlier. So do you think the book should have been written, the Satanic Verses, to begin with?
Should have what been written?
Should the book have been written to begin with? Let's say you have the power to go back in time and
I don't like this after
Magic
the fact
moment.
kind
okay,
of,
but let's say so not say after the fact lah, but
I would say that Salman Rushdie has every right to write. I mean, if he wants to write it, that's within his own right. Yeah.
yeah. So in that sense, right, then so if let's say they write it and then there's this overwhelmingly negative response, and also I mean if you think about it, my understanding of Salman Rushdie was that before the Satanic Verses, right, he was a relatively unknown fella. Like
For those who are not in the literary
Yeah,
scene.
yeah, correct. And he definitely wasn't mainstream acclaim. And from what I understand, there's a lot of criticism with regards to the way that he writes as well. And that
it's just so difficult to read. Oh
yeah,
my gosh. It's
basically
terrible.
he's not like particularly well acclaimed. But the fact of the matter is like in all essence, a mediocre writer has been shot to worldwide
Stardom.
fame as a result of the backlash against it. In a way, this is like the Streisand effect, right? It's like the negativity fits into his his claim, his fame, and then after that, more and more people got to know about it, more and more people.
By
got
the
angry about
way, the Satanic Verses topped the charts on Amazon after he was stabbed.
Yeah.
The publishers are reprinting the book to meet demand. So, like, I mean, if your point is to shut him up, you feel very badly, because more people are reading it. Whether they actually finish it is another issue, of course.
it. So I mean,
After September 11, the Quran also went up to #1 bestseller.
Oh, that's amazing.
I think, I mean, this kind of thing, people are just grappling for answers. So,
Yeah.
But you're right in that sense. But it's different from making a point to say that Salman Rushdie purposely write it in order to gain fame.
Yeah.
I
that
don't think
almost certainly not.
I
Yes.
think
Yeah.
like he was so his background was that he was raised in a Muslim household. I think they were not super religious, and he turned atheist quite early on in his life, I think. But like when you're exposed to certain things like the Quran, the Bible, or like for myself, like Taoist teachings, those are things that are kind of familiar to you, and of course probably when you do rewrite
Yeah.
like something, you might
Yeah.
turn to them, right?
Sure. Yeah, some people are saying that it's also a psychological novel in the sense that
yeah.
reflects his own
Journey of
journey of
immigration.
life, and
Yeah.
as an immigrant,
Yeah.
being unsettled in a foreign country, and the metamorphosis of his whole experience that goes into the satanic verses. So there's a lot to unpack, and it's unfortunate that people are not really discussing the literary aspects of the work and propel that into a more informed conversations over the whole issue.
But I think that goes back also to what you were saying about in your words, the insecurities of the Muslim world, where they really feel like they're under attack all the time. And such a work, when I think also during that period of time, there was a lot of people coming up just before the death fatwa. There were a lot of people that was like writing letters to the publisher asking them to take it down and to apologize, and they were writing letters to like various bookstores asking them not to stock the books, and they were all rejected. I mean, not all of them, but a huge bunch of it was rejected. So, but this goes in the like from the Western point of view, this goes in line with what they imagine the freedom of expression, freedom of speech is, right? Which is that essentially you can say pretty much anything as long as you don't cross certain lines. But then you kind of take stock of what is being said, and then you criticize, and then you can use your freedom of speech against their freedom of speech. But in this situation, right, we don't really see that. We just see a very negative reaction to the whole thing. Like how will we ever bridge this gap? I mean, it's like a big question to ask, but like is there even a way? Do you see like a solution or a way forward?
Is it like a book club where like Muslims are made to read this book and discuss it?
No, but let me take on that earlier point you made about free speech, right? I think what the Muslims in the UK at that time were experiencing, and of course I wasn't there and I can't speak on their behalf, but this was what friends who have been in the UK situation were telling us, and also from reports that came out from there, is that they saw a kind of contradictions that, as much as free speech is the foundation of the liberal values of many Western societies, it wasn't applied equally and across the board. For example, because of the experience of Europe with the Holocaust, there was a very strong guard against any anti-Semitic speech.
Yeah, you can't question the Holocaust. You can't question,
especially in France.
I think Germany as well. I think all these are
Correct.
punishable by
Yeah.
jail time.
Yeah. So
I think even the display of Nazi memorabilia or insignia is like banned on the
Yeah.
streets. in
But
public.
then there is this swath of Muslim migrants coming into Europe and being part of Europe, and then you find that same kind of denigration being done, that same kind of prejudices being channeled towards the Muslims, which was done to the Jews in the past and still going on today. Why is that not taken to task? And it's the free speech principle was used when it cannot cross the boundaries of anti-Semitic speech, for example, hate speech. So people see the contradictions there, and that's what makes them unhappy also, because it's a fair game for people to attack Muslim identity.
It's basically unequal application of law.
Yeah.
Right.
And so that adds on to the insecurity, the fact that they don't feel welcome within a country that proclaim itself to be adopting the policy of multiculturalism, for example. So I think there's a lot of things going on there, and we need to understand that also. But let's not forget provocations overseas also by Muslim governments of Muslim majority countries that also tries to instigate some of these responses for their own local domestic politics.
Right.
Right. You see that clearly in the Gillen's Poston affair, the Danish cartoon affair,
Oh, yes.
2005, I think,
Yeah.
where some Muslim governments were actually mobilizing the masses, in fact, and showing themselves to be the defenders of the Muslims globally. Of course, that is to serve their own local elections. And you find this whole sentiment emerging around the world that we must boycott France, we must do this, we must stand up for Islam. It's all driven by politicians with interests for their own domestic
Agendas,
audience.
right.
So we must not discount that also. And of course, there are extremist groups who are utilizing it for their own expansion of their extremist ideas. You see that in some Muslim countries.
So I guess going back to your original post, right? Like, how can, I guess in that post you write, how can the Malay society do better to marginalize these extremist voices unapologetically?
It's a question I put out there for everyone to think about. I'm not telling anything. I mean, I don't have the answer, but
Right.
but
I don't
it's-
think anybody does.
Yeah, I mean, if we had, we would do it already, right?
so I pose that as a point of reflection, because what troubles me is that there are reasonable voices who
Such as yourself.
depends who you're asking.
Right. Okay, that's true. That's true.
Well, there are reasonable voices who are more dialogical, who want to understand issues, who wants to discuss it in a rational way, and not being driven a lot by some of these sentiments and without understanding. Yeah, but somehow these voices also find that if they were to voice out, they will be easily shut down, and they will be boxed into the whole binary thinking that you are with us or against us kind of thinking, right? That if you were to temper the sentiments of the more extreme parts of society, then you are seen as being on the other side. You are defending the West. You are a traitor. You are not as committed as a Muslim, You are, well, you probably a deviant yourself. So that makes people scared of even voicing out because they don't want to be dragged into this binary position of us versus them. And that actually is quite dangerous in the long term because it allows the expansion of extremist narratives to actually take root and silencing people who are actually more reasonable. So it's actually constricting the middle ground and pushing people more and more into the binary or the polarizing position of you either accept that extremist way of expressing yourself and the narrative that they offer, or, and I'm saying that some young people are actually saying that, well, this is not my kind of religion and I'll just exit, right? So these are trends happening and we have to acknowledge that it's part of our responsibility for not speaking up and not doing much in that space.
Has there been a very like sizable exodus of young Muslims from the religion?
I don't have the data, but
Right.
I do have spoken to a few who have lost. I mean, they can't identify with the religion anymore because the idea that there's only one way of understanding Islam. So that becomes problematic because if there's only one way of understanding Islam and that has been dominated by a certain narrative that is extreme, then your choice is either you go with that or you leave, right?
Yep.
I think that is the whole problem because there are multiple expressions of Islam. There are different ways of understanding Islam and there are different ways of engagement with the modern world. That I think the youth need to be exposed to all these multiple forms and see what actually can contribute to the betterment of humanity.
So I guess like would it be that like the questioning of your own religion should be encouraged? Or
Yes,
like your own
in
faith or your
yeah.
commitment to it,
Yeah.
like why are you doing this? And
I think a more reflective stand, a more critical mind is necessary as part of the education process of understanding your own faith or understanding anything in the world today, especially with a free flow of information right now. People can just have access to a lot of information, but making sense of that information and questioning that information, whether it's something that is sound or valid. Those kind of mental tools needs to be imbibed in the young person.
And I think it's increasingly hard because there's just so much information, and also misinformation, right? And
There's an important work by a German psychoanalyst Erich Fromm, Escape from Freedom, and that was precisely what was happening to German society at the brink of the rise of Nazi socialism. People were just simply finding things, and they were confused, and therefore it's easier to actually latch on to someone who says, it's okay, I provide the answers, I provide the leadership for you. It's the rise of authoritarianism.
right.
So is there ever any space, right, for so-called outsiders, people not of the Muslim faith, to ever make
To participate in the discussion.
to criticize, to point out certain things? And I actually, for Salman Rushdie, right, I think we can all make the we can all agree that it is not criticism in like the most technical sense of the word, but the way that I will see it, right, is that if you are truly passionate about the religion, you will probably try to find out more about, like, what the hell is he talking about, that kind of introspection that you mentioned earlier, where in order for you to defend your religion, you need to fully understand it. And so where I'm coming from with this question, right, is that it seems to be there's almost like an automatic rejection of any type of voices from the outside that even marginally criticize any aspect of the religion. And and there seems to be very little tolerance, and you mentioned it. I mean, when I say tolerance, I mean like tolerance for what people are saying. And you also mentioned it just now, right? It's a bit like you're either against us or you're
I guess it's
with us.
the binary between, are you an Islamophobe or are you a critic, right?
Yeah.
But I
Because it's
think-
very easy to be labeled
yeah.
as Islamophobic.
So to kind of like move on with the last part of the question, is that there's the divide is if you criticize, then you're like part of the Western liberal hegemon, and then if you are with us, then you're in this like Islamic world. Like what can we do about this? Like, is there any way for us to get around this at all?
I've written previously this whole idea of ring fencing, right? That extremist groups often adopt. This is basically providing a certain narrative that is extremist and shielding themselves by drawing a boundary around or ring fencing themselves from any form of criticism, firstly from the external outsider. So non-Muslims cannot criticize that narrative that they produce within the religious community because you are an outsider. So as a non-Muslim, you have no right to speak about anything that has got to do with Muslim community, Muslim society, about Islam. So that's the first level. The second level is to then identify within the community itself who are the threats that are within the community that is actually in cahoots with the evil forces outside. So then there will be mobilization of the masses in order to identify the deviants, the heretics, those who are so-called pro-West, liberals, gays, homosexual, any kind of things that don't conform to that narrative that they provide will be seen as worthy of being marginalized and even eventually expelled.
So chaotic elements, like,
right?
basically.
So then, because of that, the extremist narrative then comes as the only not just dominant, but the only one narrative, and that's dangerous. Yeah. So, I think anyone, whether you're Muslim or non-Muslim, can talk about anything. I mean, if there is something that is seriously wrong with certain aspects of a particular community, I think everyone has the right to raise a concern, because that community doesn't exist in isolation of the whole entire society. Yeah, you can't say that you carve out a small Muslim community that then you go and play in your own Longkang, you know. And whatever goes on in the Longkang is not going to affect us.
Yeah,
You
all
can't
the
say that.
Longkangs flow into the sea.
Exactly.
Right.
You know, if there's things that goes on in the Longkang, it will affect you eventually in the long run, right? Because we are part of one society. So anyone can raise any concerns. But of course, it's what is the thing that is being raised. We have to think a bit more carefully. For example, a non-Muslim who has not studied Islam cannot confidently challenge the doctrine and say, you know, I know that this is wrong, you know. Of course, there are non-Muslim scholars who have studied Islam and they have done it in a very objective manner, and they have pointed out certain critique of certain ways of understanding or interpretation, and all that is valid, right? I think we must train people to focus on the ideas rather than who is saying it.
Yes, I think that is so important. But I think there's also that sort of like internal reluctance to actually say something that you like, talk about a top subject matter that you're not so clear about. So for example, because on my Instagram, sometimes I post out like comics about like current affairs or politics or whatever. So before the hijab was passed for like working like Muslim women, right? There was a bit of debate, remember that time. And for some reason or another, like this Chinese man messaged me on Instagram and he's like, don't you, I think you should make a comic like, about like the hijab. And I was like, what? I know nuts about it. Like, what am I supposed to say? And he was like, yeah, you can just educate people, right? I'm like, dude, who am I to educate people on like,
I think the rule of the
this is.
The rule of the thumb is simple. If you're not familiar with something, then we can't act confidently and say lots of things about that subject that we are not an expert on, right?
So okay, going back to that, right? So okay, is there ever a world where, let's say, the Christian faith, right? They are viciously mocked across all sorts of media, right? Like we will joke about Catholic pedophiles who are priests all the time, for example, and it goes like quite crazy, and it's happening in all sorts of media, right? Do we ever reach that stage with Muslims that that won't have the negative repercussions?
Do we want to reach that stage? I mean, I'll be very uncomfortable with mocking priests, for example.
We realize that has happened, right? I mean, this is something
of course, that is something that has happened. But doesn't mean that that should be the way, and therefore just make it equal,
So
for others
so
who have
for
not
example, right,
experienced
there's this artwork that like blew my mind when I was in art school and I had to study it in art history. So basically it's this guy called Andre Serrano. He made this work, like it's a photograph called Immersion Piss Christ, right? And what it is actually is a photo of a crucifix with Jesus submerged in a tank of his urine. It's a photo of that. Right. And then when he first exhibited it, this was in like 1987, like a couple years before, around the time of Satanic Verses. Right. And when he exhibited it, like he won an award for it. And lots of people were upset because the award was kind of state funded partially. Like, so a lot of Christians.
Where was this
this was in the US. So a lot of he got a lot of death threats as well, to not just the artists but also the galleries that exhibited the work. When it was exhibited, like people attacked it, like the work itself, and tried to remove it from the gallery. The Catholic Archbishop of Melbourne also like tried to stop the National Gallery of Victoria from showing it by going to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court overturned it, of course, but the show was eventually cancelled. Right, like, so it was showed for a while, I think, and then they cancelled it. So, like, I mean, do you think we should get to that point with Islam or with any religion, really, like, where such things can be?
I'll be upfront now. For me, I free speech absolutist, right? That while I may disagree with such a depiction of any religious icon or figure, but at the same time, I think the alternative is so much worse, where we tell people what to say or what they cannot say. And I think that there needs to be some sort of limit, of course, on any sort of speech. But then I think for religion in particular, I'm not so certain that the limits needs to be so extreme. Like not to the point of what
Yeah, I'm
it
not
is.
saying that
Yeah.
people should do it, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah,
like,
of course, yeah.
but should we be working towards a utopia where people don't get triggered over external things and have like religion be an internal source of, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we can
Wisdom.
definitely talk about how people ought to respond to such
In a
things.
utopia.
No,
Yeah.
to such depictions that is an assault on their sense of identity and something that they cherish. We can talk about the response, which is quite different from the earlier point that John was trying to raise. Look at how Buddhists respond to the blowing up of the Bamiyan statues, for example. That's very commendable of the global Buddhist community in the way they respond to that provocation by the Taliban, right?
I think it's also like the fact that, like the traditional Buddhist teachings are like, any image of Buddha is just a mirage or something. But
Yeah,
but
but
it
of
is
course
it
you
is a
can
provocation,
you
and
can you can also say
Yeah.
that there has been depictions of the Prophet throughout history,
Yep.
especially from the 14th century onwards. The Prophet was depicted with his face in many paintings in Tur- in the Turkish region, in Central Asia, in Persia, and that is not seen as a taboo, right?
Right.
But it's seen as a taboo right now, even though the depictions might be done with the best of intentions. I recall there was an incident of the friars in the Supreme Courtroom that has a depiction of Prophet Muhammad as a lawgiver. So they have all the different lawgivers depicted, Moses, and all that. And there was a depiction of Prophet Muhammad with his face in order to honor him as part of these global contributions of lawgivers that has shaped human civilizations. There was a protest by some Muslims, Muslim groups in the US. Eventually, there was a fatwa by a very well-respected Sheikh, Taha Jabir al-Alwani, who said that this was okay, that because it was done with the intention of appreciating the Prophet. So, and after that, the protest died down because people began to say, hey,
Maybe it's
this is
all right.
acceptable.
Maybe it ain't that bad.
He
because
said
it
it's
was-
okay, so I guess it's okay. Is that
because
the way?
someone who is respected says that depiction was done to honor the Prophet rather than to
Right.
insult him, or which is quite different when people reacted to, let's say, Charlie
The
Hebdo,
Charlie Hebdo, yeah.
which was very bad in terms of
It's satirical
it's
and
meant to be
it's
satirical, but,
derogatory in some
but it
sense.
pushes really the limits to the point where you draw the Prophet naked, bending down with a star in his rear and all that.
I don't think it pushed the limit. I think it just blew right past it. And just like
There were no
just
limits.
zoom, just pass
Yeah.
go to not collect
Yeah,
money.
yeah. So how do we respond to that? I mean, definitely people will be upset. I mean, I myself will be upset, if I were to see that. Yeah. How we deal with our emotions in dealing with that is separate from that act itself. So the question that John is asking, whether we should even allow that in the first place, I think the question is not about whether we should allow or not allow, whether we should be telling people what you can do or you can't do. I think we should be telling people how you should do certain things, because critique and criticisms is necessary of any ideas, including religion. I mean, the heresies of yesterday are the truths of today, right? So we must allow that space for critique and criticism in order to allow truth to emerge. But how we do it is where we can actually discuss that even if you want to critique a certain idea, does it mean that you have to go to the point of insult? So we should be talking really about good speech rather than this whole debate that puts it in a binary of whether we have free speech or we don't.
But the idea of like what is good speech or not good speech, right? Like you you end up becoming this like gatekeeping exercise.
I don't
where,
think it will lead to gatekeeping.
well, let's look at it like, let's say, for example, with Donald Trump, right? While Donald Trump was president, and then, you know, there's all this depiction of both him and his followers, right? Of like, you know, they're just small brain,
Tiny penis,
tiny
tiny
penis,
hands.
gun toting, redneck, you know,
Gorilla.
incestuous moron, so on and so forth, right? That, like, if let's say he was president and then he says, all of these are terrible speech, like this is terrible, it's the most terrible thing ever. Okay, let's say he does that, and he shuts it down, and he says, you know what, this wounds my feelings. Now, I don't, of course, religion, we can respect that it's a separate thing, right? We can say that, but from the point of view of freedom of speech, this is not something that it really, you know, if we come in and say what is good speech and what is not good speech, then we have essentially removed freedom of speech. I think that
like the more
I
important.
think that's an assertion that has to be defended. That if you remove this whole discussion of what is good speech or bad speech, then we are essentially going. No, what you are saying is that you just have to go into an absolute free speech, because talking about what is good or not is useless. You have to defend free speech.
Should we have like removed the stuff that was making fun of Donald Trump and his followers? If, let's say, given my example, like, should we have removed that because it falls under certain categories?
No, remove. I don't think my earlier point was about removal. My earlier point was to have a discussion and see whether that is really something that we want society to move towards.
Okay, so
can I just cut in here?
Should we move towards the let's say, either having the like very extreme mockery of Donald Trump or not? Like, what should we move towards?
I think Donald Trump will not be a good example in this case.
I think in this particular example, so the reason why I'm like talking about that, right, is that it is a group, it is an ideology, it is a person that we are talking about, and I think it's and also, if let's say we were to talk about Christianity or Catholicism, it has been done before, like what Angie has mentioned. The difference here is that there was no death fatwa issue. I think that's like the main thing. So I'm trying to like bring about
no, there were death threats.
Death threat, but it wasn't issued by like a religious
the Pope didn't come out and say, I'm going to put a bounty on this fella's head. So that is where I think
I think for me, right, like
there was in the past, though.
There was in the past.
of course,
I mean, like the Catholic Church like killed so many people, right, who were blasphemous and stuff, but they kind of moved past it mostly. But I think for me the issue is not really about good speech, right? Because I think as an artist, as somebody who creates, like a lot of stuff, right, isn't made to make things better, right? Sometimes you just want to poke fun at stuff and have fun with certain, motifs, for example, that are recognized to people. You use them in your work, and they don't necessarily serve like a purpose to make the world better. Sometimes it's just, I just want to laugh, right? Which is what a lot of cartoons do, and which is what the kind of, I guess, very poorly done Charlie Hebdo cartoons are doing. So, I mean, I guess that's for me the tension, right? Where is the line that we should draw? Like if I look at the cartoons, right, I feel like, dude, the cartoon is not worth the lives of the cartoonists, right? It's not worth the protest.
We all make decisions, right? I mean, there's pragmatic considerations, and there's also considerations that our art is not just simply limited to our own
audience who appreciates
it,
right.
And therefore there are things that we have to take into account because of these porous boundaries that things, especially in social media age, right?
Just goes spiral.
So it just goes spiral and things like that. And we must be prepared for those consequences. And those consequences must also inform how we manage our art, right? So I guess we have to be pragmatic about things, you know.
Okay, the other question, I guess.
Let me just finish this point, right? To the extent that even if we think that this is not provocative, not meant to insult, it's meant to critique, it's meant to provoke thinking, discussion, but how it's going to be received and perceived out there might be quite different. Then we must be prepared for that, right? We cannot be saying that, this is my right and therefore you all should not be protesting, you all should not be doing this. I think we have to look at things in a relational way, that we can expect people to protest, we can expect people to be angry, we can expect that a small minority will turn to violence.
Is it bigotry to say that? Because I think, when I was reading like the comments on, and social media is freaking toxic, right? I was reading the comments on the Salman Rushdie attacks. And it's not just Muslims, okay? They're like completely like tons of Chinese people who are like, well, he should have known
he deserved it.
Yeah, he deserved it. He should have known the consequences.
He doesn't deserve it.
No, and why does he have to do it in the first place, right? He should know what's going to happen. And like, would you say that this is victim blaming, or would you say that it's bigotry to say that you should know that violence is going to happen?
No, that's different point that I was trying to make.
Yeah.
It's different to say that you can expect certain reactions given the experience of previous people who have done things. You can expect that, but it's quite different to say that he deserves it because of that. I don't think Salman Rushdie deserve being stabbed, and I think that needs to be made clear. So all those comments that you mentioned earlier, that I was responding to and I was very concerned about, has to be dealt with. People who say that he deserves it is actually agreeing with the stabbing, which means that we have a huge problem here if we don't provide a counter narrative to that.
Would you say that, I was just observing that, I said it wasn't all just Muslims or Malays, right? There were lots of Chinese people doing it. Do you think that it's just our culture? Like, don't get in trouble, Don't do it because, like there's so many OB markers. If you do it and then you get into trouble, it's your fault. Do you think it's that culture as well? Like people are, when they respond to Jolovan Wem holding up a sign with a smiley face, they're like, oh, he knew what? He shouldn't have.
Before you answer, sorry, let me just move the mic a little bit closer to you. I have some comments saying that you're a bit too soft.
Oh, okay,
yeah,
sorry.
Pull it a bit closer to you.
Yeah.
All right, please go ahead.
That's a separate thing, right? This is just human nature. Sometimes you just like to see people in misery.
Yeah,
and then
of
that
course.
Schadenfreude, kind of feeling, oh, he deserves it. See, I told you lah. Who asked you to?
They love that. I told you, man. You should have asked me.
Yeah, but these are not. We should not take this kind of sentiment seriously. Also, it's just and as much as I'm concerned about the kind of postings on Malay media comment sections, at the same time also take it with a pinch of salt in the sense that it's not representative of really.
And social media is really toxic. People say all
really
kinds
toxic.
of things they would not say in real life.
Yeah, and many of these people, you don't even know who they are. I've seen some of these very nasty comments, and when I go to their profile, it's like, I'm not even sure if they're real people,
Right.
Wasn't there was this guy that pretended to be a lady and went around posting
there's
nasty
also,
shit.
There's also that element also. With social media, you can assume who you are, who you want to be. And I think there's a lot of that element that needs to be explained in this world where people feel very little. This little man syndrome. But on social media, they can be someone. They can be the champions of issues. They can, say things like they are the savior of the world. They are the defender of religion. They can be anybody they like. In their actual life, they're just nobody. So I think it's that psychological element that needs to be unpacked and to be understood by people. Why is society driving this kind of psychological state of mind, and given a platform like social media to bring their bigotry out also.
Again, it's like the best and worst thing of social media. Everyone gets to have an opinion. Everyone gets to read it.
Yeah. And also, who has time to engage 24 hours on social media?
Oh, you have no idea.
I'm sure there are like plenty of trolls.
There is this is what I call the true believer syndrome. And then there's a book, Eric Hoffer, that writes about the characteristics of a true believer. I'm also reading this Eric Bonner's book on the bigot. Very fascinating unpacking of the mind of a bigot, or a mind of a true believer, who feels that the whole weight of the world is on them and they are the champions and they're the savior. This is savior mentality, and also a sense of being the only one who will take up the flag and defend, on this variety of issues that are challenging the community, society, nation, or the world. It's fascinating because what is actually going on in the lives of these individuals, that makes them go into social media and assume this kind of persona. It's also the lack of healthy community building off screen that might be happening. And I think we need to think about providing more spaces.
Is that
offline.
where your interfaith dialogues come in? I remember a couple of years ago, I saw this really moving documentary about this black man. I think he's based in the US or something. And he's a jazz musician. And one time, he got to know some people from the Ku Klux Klan. And what happened?
Went and befriended.
Yeah, he just went and befriended those people.
Yeah.
He talked to them, even though they were talking all kinds of stupid shit about him. He was like, you know what? Yeah, we can still be friends. You're just ignorant because you've never met a person like me before. You've never been friends. So is that where you come in and what the sessions that you facilitate?
Yeah, I think it's important to actually establish real connections, and that's part of community building process. That's part of my own experience. When previously, like I mentioned earlier, back 20 years plus ago, I would see a Christian person through the lens of my own stereotypes and prejudices. Or this is the other, and every Christian I meet, I will understand that person through the lens of my own stereotypes and prejudices. Oh, he's out to convert me, or be careful, they're like this, they're like that, until I meet a real Christian person, sit down, have conversations, have a cup of tea. Initially, of course, that Christian person also might have the same stereotype and opinion on me as a Muslim also, and we're both trying to outdo each other, right?
With stereotypes.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
But eventually you got tired of it, and the conversation will stray into a more humanizing aspects,
Stuff you have in common, I guess.
Stuff you have in common, it's damn bloody expensive living in Singapore.
Oh, yeah.
What's your favorite movie? You're struggling
which football team do you support?
Yeah, those kind of things. It humanizes the other, and you begin to see the other is just like you, with their own set of aspirations that you also have, with their own set of struggles with family, friends, studies, relationships, etc. And it's not a person becomes complex to you. I think this process of complexifying the individual, as much as humanizing the individual, is very important. So you don't see a person only through one lens of that identity that the person assumes in your mind. Just now you mentioned you are non-religious or something?
Yeah, I'm just superstitious. I just beg for 40 numbers.
I'm
kidding.
Yeah. I could choose to, every time I interact with you, that's my image of you, right?
Yeah.
So everywhere I go, every number
Tiny
I see,
gambler.
I would tell you, hey, you buy
Lost
this number.
money.
Yeah. But you are more complex than that, right? You have other...
Don't be fooled by her external persona.
Yeah, that's all that there is to me, actually.
And we assume different identities at different time.
That's true.
Yeah, people always ask, people always like to ask, are you a Malay, are you a Muslim first or Singaporean first?
Oh,
Right?
okay. That's a very loaded question.
Exactly, right? These are
Where
asked
do
by
your
the-
loyalties lie?
Yeah, so
Right.
both Muslims and non-Muslims sometimes will ask this question. Whether
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Even within the community, they ask that.
Yes, there are within the community who says, no, you must put Islam first, right? So
Okay.
your national identity is secondary, because you live and die for Islam. So
And also
I
your
said-
eternal life, right?
Of course you are committed to your religion, but you assume different identities in different contexts, when I go and support the national football team, I don't assume my religious identity,
Sure.
right? It doesn't make
Yeah, yeah.
sense. I'll be waving the Singapore flag and, cheering for the country. I assume my Singaporean identity first. If I go to the mosque to do my religious observance, then my religious identity comes to the front, right? If I interact with my friends, for example, who are non-Muslims, I don't have to assert my religious identity in front of that person. I just simply relate just as fellow human beings, when I'm at home as a father, it will be different, I don't have to tell my children, I'm Singaporean. In front of myself,
You're like,
for
"Oh,
what?
yeah, so are
okay,
we."
so are we, right?
Right.
But it's people assume different identity in different contexts. we need to understand that, then don't put a hierarchy to that, because humans are complex beings.
Oh yeah, but the hierarchy is almost always there, right? And it's almost performed by the most insecure among us because they literally
Yeah.
have nothing else. So
Yeah,
I think
agree.
like that's like one of those really weird things.
Yeah, any forms of hierarchy is really needs
So
to be
like a
questioned.
question, I guess, since we're talking about hierarchies, I had this question in my mind for a while.
Hmm.
Like, is there a generational aspect to this? Because like you would assume, right? I mean, like my assumption dealing with the younger folk when I teach them, like the teenagers nowadays, that they're a lot more open-minded and prone to questioning anything and everything, even the things that you don't really need to question. You're like, hey, look, I found this new hack to life, right? And I share it on my TikTok. But like you know, like that whole very didactical, like I teach you, you listen to me thing, like aspect of religion, I guess, and also cultural stuff. Is there a need to focus especially on like maybe the people who are older, or like do you think that is not it, like it should be a whole
Yeah,
kind of
it's a yes and no. I mean, intergenerational issues will always be there, right? I mean, every generation would say that the current youngsters are worse off,
oh
and
really?
they will romanticize that. Oh, last time, it's so much better.
I feel like my people of my parents' generation, my dad is about like 70 now, I think. They do tend to like look through things with a very racialized lens. For example, like he would be interacting with somebody, right? Like, and he'll say something. Oh, you know that Malay person, da 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 da. Like the Malay lady sold me something, and he wouldn't say that for a Chinese person. He'd just be like, oh, somebody sold me that. Not in a derogatory sense, but it's just like I just need to let you know that I interacted with a Malay person or Indian person who's not Chinese.
No, my point was, every generation would say that, that they were living in better times, and the youngsters now are getting worse. I mean, our parents who tell us this now,
Because we are like
they were
strawberries.
told the same thing
Yeah.
by our grandparents, who say, your generation, all these hippies and free sex and all that, right? Or the world is coming to an end, and
Right.
then now that they are older and they become parents themselves, they'll be saying, oh, now you see these TikTokers and all this nonsense that people are doing.
Yeah.
Every generation will have that, right? But also do not underestimate that how young people does not necessarily mean that they're progressive,
Okay.
because we do have young people who are also conservative. It's the social environment that shapes them. Of course, those who are exposed to more progressive aspects of thinking, of negotiating with their current situation, will be quite different compared to those who grow up and has a certain particular way of educating them within a certain mold. They will be equally as conservative as their parents.
I was talking to Walid about this, and he was talking about like the culture of fear within like the younger people now, because people are so afraid of getting like viral, right? You'd say something problematic.
This
and
is
then,
social sense, not
in a
religious sense, right?
social
In a
sense,
social sense,
but also like I guess with the more conservative people, because I think the younger generation, they at least online socially, it tends to be a lot more progressive. So a lot of the conservative kids don't feel like they are able to voice out their opinions. For example, like what's her name? There was this lady who wrote about the trans thing and on a newspaper article. I think she was a student.
Oh, the Bertha Hansen,
A Bertha Hansen
mentee.
student.
Yeah. The mentee of Bertha
She
Hansen.
wrote about like, don't cancel me because I don't agree that trans women are women or something like that. And basically like, and because I will get cancelled. But like, is there a fear that these kids who don't feel able to voice out their opinions will turn underground? Because it's actually what's happening to a lot of like in the US, where they get shut down, they start their own site, and then they just ferment within the whole like community.
That's happening. I agree. That's happening. I mean, look at, for example, community institutions that has been helmed by senior leaders, community leaders, and young people practically have no space within that, or no voice or no say. And if they were to be involved in this kind of organizations, then they have to toe the line and they have to listen and follow the leadership that was like unrelatable to them anymore, right? So now there is a trend that people are no longer interested in being involved in established institutions and community organizations, and they set up their own. The form of community involvement is quite different now, in the sense that they are cost-based and they are quite fluid, and they can be dispersed easily.
There's
right?
no commitment, basically.
No commitment.
Yeah.
Well, they would say that they are committed to the
To the
idea,
cause,
to
yeah,
the
the
cause.
cause, yeah.
But then the way of
Not to the
responding is,
community. Yep.
it's like, okay, so we are interested in this issue. Everyone gather. Okay, I'll call for action. We all come, show our placards, and shout certain slogans, and then after that disperse and move on. Right. So that's the nature of the kind of activism, if you can call it as such. Now, whether that's good or not, that's up for debate. I would like to have a debate with Walid on this.
Ooh, can we facilitate that?
Jump on the Longkang.
Yes,
and,
come to the Longkang and brawl with each other.
Oh no, Walid is listening.
Walid, please come
Hi,
on.
Walid.
Yeah.
she's Walid's a neighbor, so
Yeah, we just live like a couple blocks away from each
Oh,
other.
nice. Yeah, it's a nice chap. Yeah. No, I think the point is the context is changing. And of course, what I see the problem here is that there is no transfer of intergenerational knowledge, because there are certain contexts in the past that those who have been through it and have learned from it, that needs to be understood by the younger generation. Even though the context now is different, but the kind of lessons and wisdom that can be derived from that struggle in the past needs to be transferred. Knowledge needs to be transferred so that the younger generation will have a better sense of what had transpired in the past, what are the lessons learned, and therefore be in a better position to actually move in the direction of whatever cause that they're taking to make this world a better place.
I think it's also important to localize that kind of knowledge as well.
Yes.
I remember doing BLM. There were a lot of like activists going on and on about BLM in the US, right? And talking about race relations when they had no idea what's happening in
here?
Singapore.
Yes.
Right.
yes.
And I was just like, what the dude?
we have
Yeah.
actual racism here in Singapore,
Yeah.
and all you care about is like George Floyd or whatever.
Yeah.
So.
But also because they grew up in an environment where people simply, they were being told that there's no such thing as racism.
Racial
here,
harmony
right?
day, we wear each other's like costumes.
The funny thing about like this conversation, right? I was just like searching online. I remember like some years back they were saying that the Gen Z, like the percentage of people who are in the Gen Z generation, who identify as conservative have like basically doubled over like previous generation. So,
Wow.
typically like young kids, right? When you interview them, you get like some margin of something like 5 to 8% would identify as conservative. Then over time, as they age, they will become more and more conservative to the point of about like between 40 to 50% of the population will become conservative. So currently, the statistics seems to point that the number of conservative Gen Zers have like doubled basically.
Wait,
And-
is this
Wait,
based in
wait,
the
yeah.
US
yeah,
or
based
like
in the
here?
US, based in the US,
Okay.
yeah. But I mean, something that Imran also mentioned earlier, where there's like the increasing rise of the far right movement, and I think the Italian election also just ended, right? And
Oh,
I
yeah.
think it was the housewife that won the far right.
Yeah.
How-
She's a piece of work, man. Like
yeah, anti-immigrant, so on and so forth. So I think as social media became like more and more left-leaning, progressive-leaning, there seems to be this undercurrent and this like people that is like of the younger generation that's hiding in like this conservative shadow.
But actually, I don't know if they are becoming more conservative or is it just that the goalposts have shifted. For example, if you say something like, hey, I think a trans woman is not a woman, then you are automatically like considered conservative because like right now the position on like the left, right? At least the liberal
yeah.
left is that you can't say this thing.
mean,
So
for
like
sure
I think then you are like, if you have those views, right, but you think that trans people should have their rights and stuff, I just don't think that they are a woman. Then you are kind of like you don't know where to place yourself anymore.
I think what you're saying is correct in the sense that the Overton window has shifted. The Overton window has shifted for the left. I think that's what I think it is. Like it's become to the point where you have to say all sorts of like agreeable things regarding LGBTQ issues and immigration and so on. So like you have to be like endlessly open and endlessly charitable to the point where any little bit of criticism like just automatically files you to the far right. So I'm not so sure that the Overton window have shifted for the conservatives. And yeah.
So you're talking about the increasing polarization, right?
I mean, I'm not so sure that it's increasing polarization. I just think that social media, right, has just driven something between all of us that ordinarily speaking, right, there won't be an issue. I think like even you and I have like disagreements, like we can sit down and talk, and we've had like chats until 2 a.m. before. So and then we, at the end of the day, we just go back home, nothing happens, right? We are fundamentally different people, right? But if let's say our interaction was just purely social media, I think the interaction might be drastically different, where really like it's impossible to humanize the other side. But then the way that social media companies in general are more progressive, there's a greater platforming of like the progressive side of the ideology as opposed to the conservative side. And I don't know that actually there isn't like all that much different in terms of like what we want, but that the messaging now, the narrative now is that one side is bad, one side is good. Like if it's again once what go back to what you say, you're either with us or against us. So yeah, I don't know. I just wish that we can.
I think social media sites are just interested in making money.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, to them it doesn't matter whether it's left or right, but groups that are utilizing it would be championing for either the left or right positions. Yeah, and it's how they utilize it. I don't think that it's being dominated by the progressives or the left wing groups. Of course, there are elements of it, and it depends on the sites that you're talking about. But there's a significant growth of right wing sites.
Yeah, but those nobody cares. I mean, like
really,
what's the one that Donald Trump? I don't even remember the one that Donald Trump. What is it? Truth Media, Truth Social.
Yeah, I can't remember.
yeah, because maybe we are not plugged into that, and we are living in our own bubble.
But exactly, I think that's the danger, right? Because it's like people who have the same views and like think the same way, they just talk to each other and then they just reinforce.
Yeah, and
that
the algorithm actually fits
Yeah,
with the things that
exactly.
that you.
I think the problem with conservatives, right, is that we don't care about cultural power, and that the left wing has always been more creative in a sense, like just generally speaking now, okay, I'm not like stereotyping anybody per se, but the left wing are like they are more concerned with the world of, like, for example, arts, with the world of the media, cultural power in information, so on and so forth. Which is one of the reasons why we don't have any so-called right-wing social media. At least not in the past. Nowadays, there's some that popped up, but nobody cares about them. And they will never, I'm not even joking about this, they will never reach the level that Twitter is on. Never. It's just not going to happen. Right-wing people don't care about any such things. They are more concerned with, I gotta go into the coal mines. I gotta dig up, fossil fuels. I'm gonna get black lung, and then I'm gonna go back and make babies. Like that's all they care about. They don't care about social media or whatever.
Okay, hold on.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll just bring it back a little bit to Islam and stuff. I think we're just going like way off into like the
into
ether
the weeds,
already.
into the coal mines.
So, anyways, like I think yesterday you posted about Muslim and like science, right? Like how do Muslims be at the forefront of scientific progress? And I found that really interesting, actually. Do you think that that kind of integration of non-rejection of science, I guess, or not like putting on like a religious lens when you approach science is going to be very helpful in that sense of being more open to the world and being more open to criticism or like thought and questionings?
But let me just put it out there that it's not that the Muslims are not learning science, not interested in science. I mean, there are.
I mean, this is not a Muslim problem, I think,
Sure,
right?
Yeah. I think what is really the issue is that scientific mind that is being cultivated. from young. I think that needs to be strengthened.
Is it like well, I mean, I wouldn't say it's a religious problem but it's also kind of like, Christians and like creationism and like people who believe that humans walk on the earth the same time as dinosaurs. I actually talked to a person who believes that, and it shocked the heck out of me. I'm like, dude, you went to like 10 years of compulsory education in Singapore and you believe that?
Well,
Right.
there are flat earthers.
Yeah, they have. and
And there are
people
people
who
who
don't
believe-
believe that we went to the
Yeah.
moon, right? Or
Yeah.
Mars. So this is not actually a Muslim problem, but
It's not a Muslim problem.
it's I guess, a religious problem.
Why is it a religious
Like
problem?
as in, if let's say your religion tells you that God created man, then like it might be hard for some people, especially if they're not brought up with parents who believe in science.
Maybe it's like
that-
also difficult to reconcile.
Integrate those
yeah.
two things, like
It's like, for
in
example, when-
evolutionism, we descended from apes versus God made us.
I don't think the idea of evolution is in opposition to religious ideas.
Right.
Uh,
I mean, like some people do hold that view, though.
of
like
course,
religiously.
and
Yeah.
I'm not denying that. Yeah, there are people who think that evolution is just a theory. It's unproven.
Yeah, they
which
call
is,
it the theory of it. So
which is untenable. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of scientific evidence to talk about evolution, right? I mean, we're observing it even in this very moment with mutations and things like that. But I think it's got to do with their lack of understanding what evolution is about.
But is there like a mismatch, right? Also, okay,
Mm-hmm.
if all you've been
yeah.
told is that God created everything, then there's no need for us to delve any further. It's like God is the final answer.
No,
There's-
God could have created the laws of the universe, and the laws of the universe is basically what we need to discover through science. It's not mutually exclusive ideas. Yeah. So the idea of the creative powers of God does not mean that there is no such thing as scientific laws. I don't think these are two mutually exclusive things. So you can believe that God created the world, but at the same time also you can believe in the evolution of lives.
how do we make that more integrated, or maybe not integrated, but how do we make it so that more people view it as not a rejection of God, but an integration of his power, or like, his divine.
Well, that has got to
Grace.
do with theology. It's how you understand theology and make sense of the world in the face of evidence of scientific facts. Yeah. I think it's a matter of responding to the evidence. Yeah. Theology will always change. Theology in the sense of how we make sense of God and things around us, yeah, because the idea that God exists and all that, these are not subjected to revisions, yeah. Otherwise, you choose either you become a theist or an atheist, right?
And also, I can, like, I mean, it goes both ways, right? Like, for example, when I was a young, arrogant kid, I was like a
Well, it's still
hardcore.
arrogant, so
Shut up. I was like a hardcore atheist. I
Yeah.
was like Four Horsemen, like huge fan of Christopher Hitchens. And
Sam
then
Harris, yeah.
yeah. And then all these people. And then I was like, yeah, there's really nothing that exists that is, out there in the universe. And then like something happened to me, like a supernatural encounter. And I was like, then I turned agnostic. I was like, okay, maybe there are things in the universe that cannot be explained by science yet.
Everyone believes in some kind of supernatural thing, right?
Yeah.
It's just things that we don't.
That's where I got like
Understand.
superstitious.
I mean, supernatural is simply things that we can't explain.
Yeah.
Or we don't know, and we have to accept our limitations as humans, and we don't know everything, right?
Yep.
So to make a very positive assertion, for example, on something, just because we have yet to make an explanation for it, that's part and parcel of being human, right? So I guess the real challenge is our understanding of God. I mean, if our understanding of God has a personal God in that sense that, responding to your beck and call,
Hey God, can you please give me A on my test?
Yes, that kind of I would call
40
that
number.
as a pre-adolescence conception of God lah. It's a God as a
Personal Jesus.
personal father figure, like who
Or
will give you
concierge or something like that.
Yeah.
Right?
concierge or
Wish granter genie.
giving you carrot or stick,
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Well, maybe it's as a child we may believe in God like that, but as we grow up, our conception of God has not evolved into something much more complex and profound and nuanced and mysterious. I think that's where the problem is, because then every single thing will be looking for this kind of transactional form of religiosity.
I do something good, I go
get
into
reward.
heaven. I do something bad, I don't go into heaven. That's all.
And if I'm suffering, look,
I'll
it's not
be
been
rewarded.
raining.
Yeah.
It's not been raining for the last 1 month. Pray to God, and please give us rain. So that kind of magical thinking that God will respond to you in that sense, that is what people are grappling with, and for many have outgrown it, including myself, right?
So this is just personal curiosity, because I'm a person who, I think at some points in my life I tried to immerse myself in like various religions, Buddhism, Tao, whatever. And I just never really understood faith, like being able to put faith in something that I can't
It's just
see.
because, right, you cannot tahan the like some guy telling you what to do. Okay, like that's the real.
Shut up, dude. No, but it's really like that sort of searching and believing in something bigger than yourself. So how would you describe your relationship with religion? Because I like to ask my religious friends these things, and everyone answers differently. So like, how would you describe your own relationship with the faith, and what does it do for you in your life?
No, this gets really personal.
Yeah. I mean, like, feel free to say as
Sure.
much as you want.
I think religion is a constant struggle, and I think it's a constant struggle to make sense of the vastness of this cosmos, and finding meaning in that whole process and connecting with the divine in a way that actually helps you to move through life, while also at the same time always questioning the process along the way. I mean, it is something that a reflective human being will always have within himself or herself. Otherwise, you become like a fundamentalist with so much certitude, that you even confine God to your own small mind, right? And I think that is the problem that we have right now. People have reduced God to their small minds.
They've kind of made God man, right?
Yeah, they anthropomorphize God to serve their wishes. It's like you watch two opposing team playing out soccer. So one set of spectators, the supporters, will pray for God to make their team win. The other one will be praying to the same God to make their team win. So we have reduced God to our.
God is like, let me
As
put you
our
guys
fan
on
club,
mute.
Reminds me
Shut
of
Shut the fuck up.
Reminds me of the Perry Bibleship comic, the Perry Bibleship Perry Fellow Bibleship comic, where there's like these two kids, they were praying to their respective god, one to Jesus and the other one to, I think it's Ganesh, like it's an Indian kid. And then there's like, oh, please let me win the spelling bee. And then the next panel is like the two deities fighting each other. And it's like in a wrestling match.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, we have reduced God to that,
wins,
Yeah.
I mean,
This
obviously.
is a colonizing God, Remember the Farid Isaac, the South African theologian, this term. We have colonized God and become very sectarian about it. God is on our side. It's actually objectifying religion itself. We have made religion or even God into an object that we possess, and therefore it's ours. And if you don't have it, you lose out, or you can choose to partake in this object that I have, and then you can come into my fold and you'll be part of my community. That is objectification or reification of religion, actually.
But I would say that I think a huge part of religion is also the community and the culture and, you know, all the rituals that people
Yeah,
participate
we can
in.
understand religion as a relational concept, you know. It's how you relate to the divine. God is not an object, but God is your relationship to the divine and your search for your constant search for the divine in your process of being human. It's also relational in how you relate to others around you. It's a community, yeah, like what you say. And these rituals form a very important element in bonding that community and defining the community because it's also a support system. Of course, then there are mystics who are on their own, you know. That's fine, that's their religious journey, but for a vast majority of people, they require some kind of community. And rituals bond this community, provide meaning, and actually prevents external threats. Even
Right.
yeah, these are very basic reasons why religion developed as an institution. But you know what? A lot of people now are questioning those very institutions and saying that either you reform the institution or I'm going to be spiritual but not religious in that sense. And they are on their own personal pursuit for the divine. Because there is something innate, I think, in human beings to see meaning beyond.
Yeah, and I think like a lot of us feel, even people who are non-religious, right? Like feel the same sense of awe. You see the
Yeah, the
Milky Way, you
awe,
feel like, oh my God, you're a tiny
Yeah.
speck in the universe, right?
Yes.
And I think that's the. So I recently had a chat with a Catholic father about this, and he was trying to say like, I'm sure you felt it, you know, like because I was asking him the same question. I'm like, what is faith? Like, how do you like whatever? And he was just like, you felt it. You just don't put like a religious like meaning to it because, you know, maybe you just don't believe at this point. Right. But he says like we all have that same capacity. And you know, like even the four horsemen, they talk about it, like feeling that same sense of awe in science, you know, or in whatever that you know.
Even stand on top of a mountain and see the vastness of you
Yep.
know, the vision before you.
Yep.
It is Rudolf Otto, the German theologian, wrote the idea of the holy, fascinatum et tremendum.
The sacred,
you know?
right?
Yeah.
Yep.
So it brings its fascination, but at the same time you tremble at your own, you know, minuteness within this vast universe, and you always question, why is there something rather than nothing?
Yeah.
And that's something science cannot answer, right?
Yeah, I mean, we can all agree that there are too many questions that science cannot answer, right?
No, can't answer
but
right now.
Right now, I mean, yeah, right, sure. We're still in the progress of discovering stuff, but
I think questions of meaning science cannot answer.
Yeah,
That's,
yeah.
of
that's not
meaning,
what
right?
science
Like
is about.
why
right?
do we do
Yeah,
it?
why
Right?
do
Not
we
like
do it?
how
We
does
can't-
it work?
We
definitely
can
cannot
understand how
answer
the
why.
universe works, but why the universe
Yeah,
exists,
why-
we can't
yeah.
answer.
But I think this is a really nice place to kind of end off.
Actually, we have a few questions.
Oh, we have a few
Yeah,
questions.
we
Oh,
have-
that's
Wait,
great. Cool.
I'm okay to go on if.
Oh, okay. If
yeah.
you don't like mind,
Yeah, sure.
going
Let's
on a
carry
little
on.
bit more.
I'm used to 5 hours of discussion up to what, John 2 a.m.
We're not going to do
Gosh.
that here. But okay, so the first question comes from our regular
Audience.
user, Cortex Pet. So she's asking, this is a meme question. Okay, feel free to answer however you like. Is it Chinese privilege for me to openly support freedom of Palestine without fear of being deemed as extremist? It's a meme question. You can feel free to skip if you
There's a lot of things going on there. Is it Chinese privilege for me to support?
support the freedom of
Palestine.
Palestine without the fear of being deemed as an extremist.
I think she was responding to my earlier comment about my friend who's Muslim, being afraid of being labeled extremist if she support like Palestine.
You see, the problem is you support what about Palestine, right? So sometimes things needs to be a little bit more nuanced. Because people say, okay, I support Palestine. What exactly are we talking about? If you're supporting Palestinians' right not to have their house demolished and their lands taken in some areas, for
Or just some
example.
basic human rights.
Yeah, and their right to have fair, their dignity of life, you know, and things like that, then I don't think it's an issue of who should support that. I think every human being with a conscience would want to see that the Palestinians have their right to life and dignity, right? But if you're talking about supporting Palestinians in the sense, okay, then therefore, you know, that some of the extremists amongst, let's say, some of the groups that commit acts of terrorism, you know, or violence through bombings and things like that, then we have the duty not to support those kind of things, even though we may understand why people are driven to do certain acts like that, but it doesn't mean that we have to support that, because those are acts that has transgressed the right to life of others too, right? So like acts of suicide bombing, for example, cannot be supported at all.
Mm-hmm.
So it really depends what we are talking about. And I don't think our identity matters in this sense. It's our identity as a fellow human being that matters when we look at injustices, when we look at, oppression.
It's about solidarity, basically.
It's about solidarity,
Right.
yeah. And we choose, sometimes the problem is also we choose who we want to talk about, right? It's very fashionable for many to talk about the oppression against Palestinians. Your next door neighbor,
Yeah, the Rohingyas.
the Rohingya,
and stuff.
nobody wants to talk about that.
Yeah, the Uyghurs in
China.
China.
You see, we pick and choose
Yep.
issues because it makes us look good.
It's
And
more
this happens.
fashionable.
It happens not just to non-Muslims
Yeah, no,
or Muslims,
even
anyone.
BLM, right? Everybody who posted the bloody black square,
Mm-hmm.
like during the pandemic, like, do you see them doing anything else right now about anti-racism? No, not at all.
Yeah. So this is virtue signaling.
Yep.
And I don't think that's good. Yeah.
I'm very happy that you took this meme question like super
Seriously.
seriously and just like answer to the best.
Sincere.
That's fantastic. Yeah,
Okay. Yeah,
Usually,
what was the- yeah.
usually in the Longkang, we are not sincere at all.
yeah we're just
Really?
we're just
Yes.
mucking about. Yeah,
We just, like, talk shit all day.
Yeah, make fun of
Yeah.
everything.
What's the other question?
Yeah, so this is regarding the intergenerational topic that we had.
Transfer of intergenerational knowledge.
Yeah, so from Natalie, my moderator, thank you, Natalie. Should the transfer of intergenerational knowledge, bracket what transpired in the past, be undertaken largely at the individual level, i.e., parent to child, for it to be authentic and effective, and not just learning from the past from sanctioned sources, i.e., museum/textbook?
No, it depends on what kind of transfer of knowledge you're talking about.
I think definitely there's like two different levels, right? There's kind of like the oral tradition.
I think
the
probably
oral
three.
tradition, the what do you call it, like the stories of your forefathers and so on and so forth. And then there's like the wider historical events that occur, so on and so forth. Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
yeah. go
Sorry,
ahead.
just let me. I think there's one part that she missed out, which is the community part. Meaning, like, for example, she was talking about parent and child, and then the institutions. But there are also like the community level where, for example, at RC or something where there's a group of people.
So she does have a follow-up to this. Maybe now
okay.
that you mention it, right? Maybe I just like interject with it also, which
Mm.
is, would it be correct to say that we, in the acquisition of knowledge or on any topic, need to be encouraged to look beyond the information sources that we were fed and given? So I mean, we can kind of like broadly talk about kind of the various things the various institutions, either on a familial level, communal level, or even on a national level.
Yeah, I mean, there are different types of knowledge that we are talking about when we talk about transference of knowledge, right? There's knowledge that resides in individuals. And oral history becomes very important in terms of listening to how they experience certain episodes in the past and how they deal with certain challenges. So that's one element. There's also knowledge that resides in organizations that have been struggling against certain issues, for example, and how they maneuver within that context of that time where you can't even talk about race openly, right? How do they manage that? So those kind of information would be very useful for people today who wants to engage in anti-racism work, right? What people have done in the past, what they've tried, and what are some of the positive impact that has been made, changes, even though maybe small here, bits and there, but I think that's important to learn from, right? Instead of just dismissing it and saying, oh, people in the past have not done anything at all.
Look at all the problems.
I'm doing all this now, right? So I
Yes.
think that's a very arrogant way of putting things, yeah?
I think youth just lends that arrogance to everything.
And
Yeah.
I think, okay, just to briefly interject, NG has a podcast about the Operation Cold, like the people from Operation Cold Store. So definitely it's
Okay, so that's
definitely like the stories that these guys are telling, right? They are anywhere near like any history books, museum or whatever.
So then you're talking about official narratives, and there's also narratives that are buried from the
certainly,
perspectives of the social actors of that time, which might view things differently. I think that's the task of the historian to reconstruct this using all the various sources, right? So we can't say that this narrative is right or wrong unless you actually do an objective study of it and bring in all these sources and you reconstruct what happened.
And
in the
again,
past,
like,
right?
you know, like this is something that I really feel like I experienced when doing that podcast was interviewing multiple people about the same event gives you like wildly different points of view, even from the same faction, you know, if you want to call it that.
Because different people will have different vantage points when they experience and they view certain things. So I think for us, it's actually to take a step back and make sense of these different data points and see what emerged out of it to have a fuller picture of things, right? But that requires study, research, that requires seriousness.
Things that we do not have time for in the long run.
But okay, so I guess the question is like, how do we bring that on a more accessible level for, let's say, the average kid on the street who's not really like interested in all these things? Yeah, I want to do my whatever, you know, hang out with my friends. How do you make them interested in such?
You can make
things?
people interested in things that they
How
are
do you
not interested
brainwash
in.
them? I want to brainwash.
Because then it will be forcing them
Yeah,
and dragging them into your issues.
that's true. Why
I
can't we
think
do that?
What is really important as a society is to develop that curiosity of things that are around us, that active mind that questions the way society is developing, what had transpired in the past, what can be better in the future, and what do we need in order to understand our position within all this matrix of things that have happened before, and what we can actually do, no matter how little it is, to make things better in the future. But to have that kind of commitment requires you to have a deep sense of curiosity, to find out, to discuss, to read, to search, to sit with people and have dialogues, conversations. I think that is what we need to cultivate. The issues, different people will have different issues that they are pet topics, you know, things that they're interested in. People would pursue different interests. But it's that same baseline of having that curiosity that actually needs to be cultivated from young.
All right, that's all the questions we have, and I think we can wrap up this live stream that we have. Thank you very much, Imran.
Wait,
once again.
let's just let me ask you one question.
Sure.
What is the one thing? I mean, with all
Miss
your
Universe question.
yeah, what is like
World peace.
world peace?
Okay, that's it.
Like, I mean, with all your experience, right? Like hosting and facilitating interfaith dialogue. What is your, takeaway about how we can communicate better with each other? Especially like you're saying, like looking at people through like lenses of stereotypes.
I think before we learn how to communicate better, we have to learn how to listen first. Listen deeply. Yeah. I think the problem is sometimes we are too eager to convey our points of view, but we don't really listen to what the other person is trying to say, which may not even be in the forms of words. So if someone acts in a certain way, that is also telling you something, right? And if I'm curious enough, I will want to understand why someone behaves that way, why someone responds to an incident in that way. And having understood deeper, then I think that's where I can then see how my own points of view will be transformed by that new information and understanding that I have. That also means that I have to engage in a conversation and a dialogue with that person in order to understand that person deeper. And that requires holding back our own points of view sometimes in order to allow ourselves to be transformed by what we listen. I think that's missing even in many interfaith conversations. Everyone just wants to say their point of view. My religion says this, my religion says that. Everyone just wants to put their opinions on the table, but who's listening?
I think also like how do you listen to the actual intent of the words, right? Because I feel like a lot of times I have conversations with people and they take entirely different meaning.
They
out
talk
of
past
what I
each
say.
other.
Yeah.
Because we don't have spaces to clarify things, you know. So we just react based on what we perceive, based on our own meaning of the word that we put on that person. I think we need to,
Like, for
hold
example,
back.
just now we had this thing where I said relaxing about, your religion, and then you told me that, relaxing in your religion means something like more negative, right?
Yeah, something
Correct,
like
something
that.
like that. Yeah. Just the use of words.
Yeah. So I think we are also living in a world where people are quick to jump to conclusions. I think it will be better for everyone to just have a little bit more introspection and a kind of humility to tell ourselves that, look, we don't know everything, and that makes me want to know more what you have to say and understand you deeper. And if I don't understand, I will ask you. But that's where then people are too afraid to even ask, right? We go back to John's earlier point. There's a lot of fear going on. If I were to ask, people might even interpret it in the wrong way, that I'm trying to provoke or I'm trying to be funny. Yeah. And then the next thing you know, someone will post something online or make a police report or whatever it is. So it's better to just shut up and keep quiet. I don't think that is the right way forward. I think people need to have that space to be able to ask all kinds of questions within an environment that has established that it's out of goodwill, out of that desire to understand, rather than to debate and to prove who's right and who's wrong, or who should win in this battle over issues that sometimes we don't even understand fully,
So where can people find the
please
sessions that you
plug
host?
yourself.
Like,
Tell
where
us
can they join in these dialogues?
Well, there are multiple groups conducting different kinds of dialogues over race and religion. My own Center for Interfaith Understanding, CIFU, will be running our second run of our fellowship program, where we talk about sensitive topics. Sensitive in open inverted comma, because not everyone will find it sensitive, but for some people they might be sensitive, like, for example, race and racism, gender and sexual orientation, economic inequality, interfaith marriages, and conversion and proselytization. So these are issues that are talked about, but sometimes people don't know how to talk about these issues in a productive way.
Can be very tricky to navigate, especially.
Yeah. And we do a modeling of conversation. If people can see how two people with two different opinions on a particular matter can actually have a civil conversation and be their authentic self without having to gloss over the issue or end up in a way where they hate each other after that conversation. If we can model that kind of conversation where we can agree to disagree, sometimes I don't like disagree to disagree kind of thing, but anyway, you know what I mean.
Sure. Yeah.
I think then we can actually develop that kind of capability in the public on how we can have these kind of conversations openly.
Is it open to the public?
It's open to public.
Is there a place that we can find it?
Right now the
Website or
publicity is not out yet.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's going to be out soon.
Okay.
Yeah, so just
So
go to our Facebook
just
page.
look out for CIFU.
CIFU.sg, facebook.com/CIFU.sg.
Awesome.
So they'll be there. There's also other groups, and I want to plug in some of my friends' initiatives.
Yes,
also.
please.
There's Hashpeace, which does conversations over race issues also, and there's also other groups like Roses of Peace. There's also different groups. I'm sorry if I don't mention them. It's just my mind is tired right now. I may not forget everything. Yeah. But yeah, or you just get in touch with me. Just drop me a note on Facebook. Messenger. Yeah.
Is there anywhere else besides Facebook where you post your musings and thoughts and stuff?
I'm a very private person, actually.
Okay. All right.
In the sense that my Facebook, I treat it not as I'm not a public figure in that sense. I don't have
really?
follow me and all
So
that.
you say.
So you're everywhere.
I'm not so sure about you.
You're such a public figure.
I see you everywhere on TV. I see you I hear you on
Newspaper.
radio. I hear you on newspaper.
That doesn't mean I'm a public figure. It's just
Well, hold on.
No. What I mean is my Facebook page is
Yep.
very private to
Yep,
me in the
yep.
sense. I mean, it's my personal musings. Sometimes I post my family photos and things
Yep,
like
yep.
that. It's not like a public
Free for
figure
all,
page,
yep.
where
Okay.
I push certain
Yep.
things out there. But I do write. I do comments on issues. People like. Then okay, if they disagree, yeah.
I
feel free
almost
to
wish you
disagree.
would be a public figure because I feel like a lot of your writing is really good reflections of a lot of the current events that's happening.
Yeah. Also, a lot of people will be unhappy with what I write. Also, I mean, I've
yeah.
gone through that kind of thing also, where I get attacked online also.
Of course.
Yeah, but it's part and parcel of wanting to do your small bit to
Yep.
to society lah. I think it comes along with that.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you so much, Imran.
Thank you very
for
much.
joining us, and thank you to our audience for also participating and submitting questions. And and that shall be all for today. Thank you all, and then we shall see you next
I
time.
can get out of the Longkang now.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank
Do you feel burnt?
No, I enjoyed the
Yeah,
conversation
okay.
actually.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
Yeah, well, we covered many things.
Quite a lot of
yeah.
topics.
Although,
All right.
yeah.
I shall stop streaming.